one of the responsibilities of state legislators involves keeping in touch with school administrators in their legislative districts. The need to do this is even more important now as the state budget impasse approaches its fifth month. State Representative Kristin Phillips-Hill recently held a conference call with school superintendents in the 93rd Legislative District and is here to discuss how exactly that call went. Now, in your district, we're talking about Dallastown, Red Lion, Southeastern, Southwestern, and you also have a little sliver of the Spring Grove School District.
It's actually Southern, not Southwestern.
I'm sorry, Southern, excuse me.
Yes,
You're right, Southern,
Southern.
excuse me. How would you describe the tone of that call? How'd it go?
Our superintendents are very concerned. Obviously, to their credit, they are very well financially managed, and they are preparing for the worst and, of course, hoping for the best. Several issues were raised during the conference call, one of which is that the state has withheld payments to the school districts for the purpose of making charter school payments. What we have learned is that there are a few districts in York County and across the state that have had money withheld from the state for the purpose of paying those charter schools when they have already made the charter school payments. And now Pennsylvania Department of Education is making them go through a very onerous process to try and get back money that they should have been given all along. And we've also found out that those charter schools have not received payments from the state with that money either. So that money is sitting in limbo, and that's not acceptable.
I need to back up for just a second because there are probably some people who don't understand the tie between a charter school and a public school. Explain what that link is.
So charter schools, when a student in a public school makes a decision to go to a charter school, the public school makes the payment for that child to be educated. So they send local share and state share to those charter schools for the purpose of educating students from the sending district.
And you're saying the payments are being withheld?
Correct.
Because?
We're not really sure. So we're in the process of trying to figure out what's happening. This impasse has created great problems for all of our children, regardless of whether they attend a public school, a private or parochial school, or a charter school. And it's really not acceptable.
The Auditor General, Eugene T. Pasquale, has been issuing monthly updates, unfortunately, because of this, on how things are progressing in this budget impasse. And he recently gave the latest update. What did he say?
I had the opportunity to listen to him this morning, and he said at this point, the September payments to the schools from the state have been missed. The October payments have been missed. We now have more schools having to borrow money. We now have reached a total of $431 million borrowed with a pending interest payment of $14 million. If the state doesn't make their November payment to our schools, that could potentially double with greater interest payments as well. And that will begin to impact York County because we do have two schools that are on the verge of needing to borrow money. One of them is in the 93rd district and the other is in the city. We're very concerned, and of course, by December, if we miss that payment, then Philadelphia City Schools will have to borrow an extensive amount of money as well. So we are very concerned. And what's even more frustrating is that through research on PennWatch, what we have learned is that the governor has spent $27 billion since this impasse has begun. $563 million of that has come from the Pennsylvania Department of Education, but that money has not shown up in our schools. Right now, all of our federal money that is being held hostage in the state treasury for things like school lunches, for money for students with disabilities, money for students who live in poverty, all that federal money is being held hostage. And we have not been able to pass emergency funding to disperse federal money to our schools, let alone funds that are really necessary for them to operate. We also heard today from the Senate some very interesting conversations. We understand that, We've hired state meteorologists. They have done studies on how to take care of domesticated animals during a weather emergency. That was $140,000 for the study. It was $62,000 for the meteorologist. How can we spend that money and not provide the necessary funds to our public schools?
And this is all or was all avoidable, even if because we could have passed the stopgap budget.
Absolutely. On so many levels, this was not necessary. The first budget that we passed provided an increase of $100 million in education funding. That was vetoed. Then we tried to override to provide, at the very least, the federal money to our schools. And we couldn't get our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join with us. We attempted to pass an emergency spending bill that would have funded schools so that they could get through this until we could get a budget negotiated. And that was vetoed as well. So we need to put aside our issues, and we need to fund a responsible budget and get that money to our schools so they don't have to continue to incur more debt while they wait for us to do our job.
Finally, you're probably about as good a person to ask as anybody about this. The governor and his supporters have insisted that the budget we pass has to atone for the cuts that occurred during the Corbett administration. You were a school board director during those supposed cuts.
You know, it's a myth, and I really don't know how to put it any other way. That money was federal stimulus money. It was under the Rendell administration. Governor Rendell sent a letter along with those funds telling school districts, this is temporary funding. Do not use this for reoccurring expenses. You know, so it's a myth. It's a bit disingenuous to say that. And you know, when you talk about cuts sustained, we've had an inequitable funding formula for the last 23 years. York County school districts have been on the short end of that state funding distribution now for as long as my oldest child has been alive, right? 23 years. You know, but we know that we need to move forward. We need the governor to enact a fair and equitable funding formula, and not a funding formula that attempts to atone for some, you know, perceived mistake in the past.
If you have questions about this or any other legislative issue, we'll show you the representative's contact information on the screen in a few seconds. I'm Scott Little. This has been Legislative Report with State Representative Kristin Phillips-Hill.